Running a virtual firewall is a complicated subject, one that practically everyone I know, including myself, has a strong opinion about. But there are reasons why you might want to run one in your Homelab. So let's walk through setting one up the right way, shall we? Hey there, Homelabbers and self-hosters, Rich here. This video will take you through creating a virtual pfSense Firewall on VMware ESXi and how to correctly design your virtual networks and virtual switches to protect your hypervisor. Let's get started. Alright, first let's get the important stuff out of the way. Running a virtual firewall has additional risks that you need to be aware of before you consider deploying one, and that risk is the hypervisor itself. Regardless of what hypervisor you use in your Homelab, these days all of them are potentially susceptible to attack and ransomware because, in the end, they're just computers running an operating system that have their own bugs, vulnerabilities, and security footprint. With that in mind, it's important that you keep not only your firewall software updated, but also your hypervisor itself updated because, in effect, you're exposing not just one system, but potentially two to the internet directly. I don't personally see this as a reason not to deploy a virtual firewall, but I think it's important to start with this because you very much need to make sure your management interfaces are not exposed to the internet. And this is the case for any hypervisor you'd use. We'll go through setting everything up correctly for ESXi later in this video, but first, let's talk about the pros and cons of running a virtual firewall. There are plenty of reasons to run a virtual firewall and plenty of reasons not to run one as well. Let's start with the pros. The first one is cost savings. Running a virtual firewall has zero additional cost because there's no additional hardware to buy or acquire. You've already invested in the hardware for your hypervisor, so why not use it? The second pro is scalability. Being virtual means that if you need more compute resources, RAM, or storage, it's just a few clicks away and your system has more, something you can't easily do with a hardware firewall. The third pro is deployment flexibility. You can deploy virtual firewalls in your Homelab, data center, or even in the cloud, and they can all be the same because there are no limitations or restrictions due to physical hardware. And the last pro, number 4, rapid deployment. Deploying, starting, or rebooting virtual machines is always incredibly fast, especially when compared to physical hardware boots. This means you can spin up and down, redeploy, and rebuild your virtual firewalls many times faster than you can with a physical firewall. Now on to the cons. Since we already talked about it, we'll start with security risks. As mentioned before, running a virtual firewall means taking into consideration the additional security risks of potentially exposing your hypervisor to the internet or other unsecured networks. The second con is performance concerns. Virtual firewalls might suffer from performance issues compared to dedicated hardware, especially when processing high volumes of network traffic. Depending on your hypervisor and how it manages prioritization, you might see slower speeds in routing and packet filtering when reaching very high throughput speeds. The third con is resource overhead. Unlike dedicated hardware, your virtual firewall will be running on a host with likely many different virtual machines also running on it, sharing resources. If you're not managing resources properly, you could hurt your firewall's performance. The final con is increased network complexity. Hardware firewalls are much easier to understand in terms of physical connectivity to your networks. You can visibly see the LAN connection and the WAN connection and where they physically connect to your network. A virtual firewall has no physical connections and is very dependent on your virtual network configuration in your hypervisor and how that interacts with the rest of your network. I think it's important to note here that these pros and cons are the same for every virtual firewall running on any hypervisor, whether it's Proxmox or XCP&G, ESXi, or even, dare I say, Hyper-V. If I haven't scared you off by this point, great. Let's get to building out our virtual firewall on ESXi. We need to get a few hardware prereqs out of the way first though. This video assumes that you already have VMware ESXi deployed, updated, and functionally healthy with at least 2 physical network interfaces in the host. If you're new to ESXi or you need help getting going, I have a video for that. We did a video on installing VMware ESXi 8 start to finish, and I've put a link in the description below. I'm also going to try something different with this video. I'm going to do this with you in real time. Let's see how that goes. Okay, here we are at the web interface of our VMware ESXi 8.0 U2 hypervisor that we just freshly built. And we're gonna log into that with the username root, which is the default, and the password we set during install. And you can see that this is fresh, this is brand new. There's nothing running on it, no virtual machines, a single data store that was built during the installation, and the default port groups of VM network and management network, and under virtual switches, just vSwitch 0, which is the default. So to get going here, we basically need to do just a few things to make sure that our hypervisor is safe for pfSense, and that starts with going to virtual switches, and we need to create a new virtual switch. I like to call this virtual switch because what we're using it for, internet only. And we need to choose the uplink or the network interface on the box that's going to be used for this vSwitch, and that's this guy here. This host technically has 3 interfaces, and one is directly connected to the LAN, and the other one is directly connected to the internet here. So VMNIC2 in this case is going to be the one that's directly connected to the internet. No other changes here, so we'll just click Add, and now we have our internet-only vSwitch, which is perfect. We will head back over to port groups, and just to make life easier for all of us here, I'm going to go ahead and right-click on this guy and go to Edit Settings. I'm going to change this to LAN so that we know that this is the local network and not the internet, because you'll see here in a second. And click Save, and now that's called LAN, which is good. We're going to click now and add a new additional port group, and this guy we're going to call WAN, because this is going to be our wide area network connection. Virtual switch here, this is where we choose internet only, because we want to make sure we choose the virtual switch. And just for clarity's sake, for those who don't know, you add interfaces to virtual switches, vSwitches, and then you add port groups to virtual switches, and the virtual machines go in the port groups. So that's the order of operations. Virtual machines to port groups to vSwitches, and then the vSwitch to the physical internet interface that goes out to the internet. All right. Believe it or not, that is the basic fundamentals we need to do here, because what we've done is we've made sure that we have a dedicated virtual switch and port group that's only for internet traffic. There's no management interface inside of there. There's no possibility that any traffic that's on there would be able to get to the management interface of our virtual host, which is perfect. So next stop is to jump over to Data Store here, because we need to upload the pfSense ISO that I downloaded to build the virtual machine. So I have one data store called Data Store, and we'll click Data Store Browser at the top, and we will click Add Directory. And we're going to go and create a directory called ISOs, because that's what they are. Click Create Directory, and then I'm going to click inside the ISOs directory, and I'm going to click Upload here, and I'm going to choose the pfSense ISO that I downloaded. Keep in mind that when I downloaded this, it was actually a gzipped file, so I had to extract the ISO out, so you'll need to make sure you do that too, because you can't use the gzip to boot. You need the ISO, which is in the gzip. I have no idea why they do that. Anyway, that's selected, so we'll click Open, and we'll watch it upload. It's a pretty small ISO, so it goes pretty quick, and you can see the status there, and then down here in your recent tasks going as well. All right, perfect. That's done, so we're going to click Close here. And now we're going to build our pfSense virtual machine. So we'll head over to virtual machines on the left and click Create. And creation type, this is going to be a virtual machine. We're not deploying an OVA or OVF. So we'll hit Next and give it a name. You can give it whatever name you want. This is a human readable name. This isn't the host name of pfSense. So you can call it whatever you want. Call it Firewall. I'm going to call mine pfSense because that's what it is. Moving on, compatibility, we want to leave it on 8.0u.u2 because that is the version of the hypervisor we're on, so we don't need to worry about backwards compatibility for other hypervisors in case we were moving VMs around. So we'll leave it as set. And we need to choose the guest family. In this case, we got to go to Other because FreeBSD is in the Other category. And once you select Other, and under Guest OS version, navigate down to FreeBSD 14 64-bit or later because pfSense now runs on FreeBSD 14, which is awesome, so select that. And we're going to hit Next. It wants to know where we want to put the virtual machine. We're going to leave it. We only have one data store on this virtual host, so we'll leave it data store and hit Next. And now we get to configure and customize the hardware for pfSense. I am going to choose 4 vCPUs here. Now, what you choose for your hardware configuration for pfSense is going to be largely based on what kind of hardware you're running for your hypervisor, right? So if you have a big, powerful virtual host and it's got lots of high-speed CPUs and RAM and storage and that stuff, you can choose whatever best suits your needs. And the beauty of virtualization is that you can always add more later, right? You can always scale up, and that's really nice. So don't worry if you think you made the wrong decisions here. You can always add more later. So 4 CPUs for here. I'm going to switch this over to gigabytes, and I'm going to add 8 gigs just because I have plenty of RAM in this host, so I'll give it 8 gigs just for memory. For the hard drive, 8 gigabytes is not enough in my opinion. I think pfSense would probably run on it, but I'm going to add 30 gigs because that's just kind of the sweet spot, I think, for pfSense. It doesn't need to be much bigger than that. Scrolling down, by default, we have one network interface. And right now it's assigned to LAN. We need to add a second one because we need two interfaces for pfSense. We need a LAN and a WAN, right? So in this case, what I'm going to do is we'll go to the top and we'll click Add Network Adapter and scroll back down. And now we have two, and they're both in the LAN. We're going to take the first one interface and we're going to set it on WAN because pfSense likes to default to choosing the first interface for internet. So we'll leave it WAN, and then the new interface is set to LAN. So next is we need to select the bootable ISO to install pfSense. So we'll click on host device and we'll select data store ISO. We'll navigate to the ISOs directory and then to the pfSense ISO that I uploaded. And once that's selected, we'll hit select. That is all we need to do here. Like I said, your configuration is going to be largely up to you and you can play around with it. Hit next, and this is just a summary of all the things that we just previously did. So we'll hit finish. And building VMs is super, super fast, right? Basically all you do is VMware is just going to carve out a disk, a virtual disk, and a configuration file. So we'll click on pfSense, our new virtual machine. It's obviously not running. Here's all the default information that shows that, here's our hardware configuration that we built, and we're going to go ahead and hit the play button, or start in this case, and we are going to kick off the install. All right, so there's a EULA. I'm going to say we read it. And our first, we're going to install here, so we'll just select install. Here you get to choose how your disk is partitioned. I know I'm going to get some flack from people who are watching this, but I prefer UFS for a single disk in virtualized pfSense, so I'm going to choose auto UFS. If you had a physical pfSense firewall with two hard drives in it, I could see ZFS being useful because then you could do some redundancy in case you lost a disk, but we're in virtualization, so losing a disk is not really likely. So we're going to click OK, and we're going to use the entire disk. And because it's a small disk, we'll leave it on an MBR and DOS partition. This is the partitions that it wants to write. I agree, so we'll hit finish, and then we'll click commit to say go forth and partition. And now it's moving copying the files for the OS off of the ISO onto the hard drive, and we're done. That's pretty remarkably fast, but that's how quick it is. We'll click reboot here and wait for this to go down, and then boot up off of our brand new installed pfSense box. Okay, so it's hard to see there because it jumped up, but it asks us if we want to set VLANs. For the purpose of this video, we are not doing VLANs. This is a flat network with a LAN and a WAN only. So we're going to hit N for no and hit enter after that. And it's going to ask us what our WAN interface was. You could, again, when you did the NIC setup for the virtual machine, you could have had them set in any order. You just have to remember which one's set to which. So we know that the first interface was set to WAN. That's the way we set up. So we'll type in VMX0, which is 0 for the first in this case. And then it's going to ask us which one is the LAN. You could hit A for auto, but I like to be purposeful with this. So I'm going to say VMX1, and we'll hit enter. And it's going to show us, are we sure that the WAN is on the first interface and LAN's on the second? Yes, it is. And so we'll hit Y for yes and hit enter. And now it's doing its thing and building it out. Okay. And here we are at the menu system of the console for pfSense. This is the way it's always going to look here. And what we need to do now is we need to go and configure via the web interface of pfSense. And this is our LAN address right there, the 192.168.1.1. So we're done with pfSense on the virtual side. Everything's ready to go. We need to go now configure pfSense to work as a firewall. So we'll open a new tab. Click here, we're going to type in 192.168.1.1. And we don't trust that cert, so we'll click this, and here's our freshly built pfSense. So from here, we'll log in with admin, that's the default username, and pfSense, all lowercase, and we'll click sign in. And we will start walking through the sign in, or the setup. So hit next, and next again. These are all the configurations you get to decide, like what do you want to call your pfSense host? We'll call mine pfSense. The domain we can call, how about 2GuysTech? Yeah, let's call it 2GuysTech. And I like to choose my time zone. So we'll zip down here to all the way down to US Pacific and hit next. This is the WAN side of the setup. So my ISP provides it via DHCP, so we'll leave it as is. We're not going to set a static address or anything like that. We don't use PPPoE or PPTP here. So scroll down the bottom and hit next. This is the LAN interface. Like we already typed in 1.1 up here, if you remember. If you want to use a different address range for your LAN at home, you can change it here now, but doing so will also require you to reconnect to the pfSense web interface after you set it and start the setup again. So we'll leave it 1.1. Hit next, set an admin password that I can remember for right now. And we'll hit reload. And what that does is it just applies our configuration to pfSense. So it takes a moment to do, and then we'll get back to the congratulations. You can check for updates to your pfSense Firewall if you're running on a slightly older version, or you can click finish down below and accept their copyright and trademark notices. And here we go. This is pfSense, and it's up and running, and you can get to the web now if you've got your WAN set up. And that's really all there is to it. It's amazingly simple and easy. You just got to make sure that you have your hypervisor management interface and your vSwitches set up properly to protect your host. And that's really all there is to it. As long as you've created a dedicated vSwitch and dedicated port group and keep your management interface off the internet, you'll be good to go. Now, there are more complex ways to configure your virtual networks using VLANs for your management interface, or even VLANing your LAN and WAN into a single physical interface. If that's something you might be interested in, let us know in the comments below. And that, friends, will do it for this video. If you liked it, throw us a sub and a like. And if you have a beef with anything I've said here, let me know in those comments below. Special thank you to our YouTube members. You guys help keep the lights on, and we thank you for it. If you'd like to help support the channel, consider becoming a member or buy some of our swag. It all helps us keep making these videos. And now that you've finished watching this video, how about checking out this playlist over here of other great self-hosting and Homelab videos we've done in the past. If you're looking for your next great self-hosting idea, we can help.